Okay, welcome back everyone. Today we're doing Lab Exercise 8, Excel Pivot Tables Part 2. So where we're going to start, download the same file that we used last week. It's posted up on Blackboard along with Lab Exercise 8. And when you open it up, you'll see this set of data, same as last week. So first thing we're going to do is create the pivot table. So click in some convenient area like A1 and go to Insert and Pivot Table and select the default options to put everything in a new worksheet. So I'm gonna zoom in a little bit. Some people the other day told me that they would have preferred if it were a little more zoomed in. So I'm just gonna do that. Ta-da. Okay. Now, what are we going to do first? Well, we're going to do something besides summing. We used a lot of summing last week, but we're going to start off doing averaging. So let's start by putting vendor. We're going to click vendor and amount to include vendor as the row and amount as the column. And then you see that automatically it gives us the sum of the amount in the values block in the bottom right. Now, if we wanted to switch that from sum to say an average, we click on the drop down menu here and go to value field settings. And we can look at different things, right? So down here, instead of summarizing values by sum, we can use the average. So just click OK on that, and ta-da, now it's in the average. Okay, and if you want to do the sum again, well, the easiest ways to do that is just to drag the amount down into values again, and then we get, boom, sum of amount, the default setting. There's a lot of decimals here in these column B entries. If you want to get rid of those, I wouldn't blame you. So we're going to dial that down a bit too. Just select the numeric values and then this here, the decrease decimal tool, and we can dot that down to a couple places. Okay, so that's it. So putting in an average instead of a sum is pretty easy. Okay, and what this is basically for all the amounts for this vendor, the average is 296. For all the amounts for this vendor, it's 306, and so on. Okay. Now, the next thing we're going to do, oh, I should mention, there are other things, right? Besides average, if you go into values field settings, you can see things like count, like max and min. You can do standard deviations or variances. All those are there too. So all the basic ones. Next thing we're going to do is sorting. Okay, so we want to do sorting, right? The first thing we might try to do is sort these vendors alphabetically. Well, in order to do that, these row labels, right? Click on this little drop-down menu, and we just go to sort A to Z. Ta-da! And they're sorted. Okay, so that's pretty easy. What else? We could do some grouping. Okay, so if we want to, right here, all we have is the total, but suppose we want to break it down by date, right? So if we want to do monthly invoice amounts, right, basically the subtotals for each month, what we need to do is first of all include our date received. So date received, we're going to grab down into the row, right, put in the row entry so that for every vendor, we break down that vendor's transactions, all of its invoices, into the individual months. Okay, but if you blow this up, right, so right here you have, the amount for January. If you blow that up, you can look at all these different values, right, for individual days. But if you just want to get rid of those, and that's what we're going to do here, you can right click on one of them and go to group, and that'll group all those individual days, right? Once we click here, unclick days, and just leave months selected, and that'll group everything in there to months, right? So we don't see those individual dates anymore. Okay. And in general, that's what you want to do when you're grouping a subunit into the unit. You want to blow it up to find the particular subunit you're working with. In this case, if you want to group all the days into a single month, you find an individual day and click group and bring that into months. Likewise, if you wanted to group all the months into particular years, you would click on the months in order to group those. All right. The next thing we'll do is ranking. Okay, so suppose you have some kind of ranked list, right? Like you have here these 5 vendors, and suppose we only wanted to show the top 3. All right, well, what you could do, click on this icon here and do value filters. And value filters, we have this link to what's called the top 10, which, is arbitrary. You can do different numbers. So if you wanted to do top 3, right, just replace that by 3, and we'll do that by, we could do it by average, we're doing it by sum. We'll do it by sum. Whoop, sum of amount. Okay, and click OK. And now look at that. We only see the top 3 vendors. And if you went back here, I could undo that briefly, and you can see, yeah, those are the top 3, the 26.9, the 10.7, the 11.9, right? These other 2, they're smaller. So get those top 3 ones. Okay, now of course, if you wanted to do, a different number like top 4 or top 2 or top 1, you just select a different number there. All right, another thing you can do is percentages, right? So suppose you want to see the invoice amounts as percentages of a bigger total, right? So for example, for the total of all the vendors, right? Here, we're gonna clear the filter. So click on this tool here, right? This little funnel tool, and select clear filter. That's gonna remove the filter, so that brings us back to our initial state. And suppose we want to say, okay, how much of total sales are fish bowls, for example, or how much are SPIs? Okay, so we'll show you how to do that. So in the values block, click the down arrow by sum of amount. Okay, so this one by sum of amount, go to value field settings. Okay, whoop, sorry, I unclicked it, I think. Let's see, we'll bring that one back down there. Sum of amount, get to value field settings. I think I accidentally clicked on remove field, I must have. Okay, and we will do show values as, right? So click on this tab here and show values as percent of parent row total. Okay, so for the individual vendors, the parent row is the total, right? It's basically 100%. And so for each of those vendors, it's going to show you what the percentage is. So if I hit OK, ta-da, you can see that Aligny, which is the biggest of them, is like 44%. Fishbowl and Trilogy are both close to 20%, and Partzilla and SPI are substantially lower. Right? And if you add all those numbers together, 44, 61, 71, 78, so let's say 98, right? And then allow for the fractions, it comes up to 100%. Okay, so that's how you do percentages there. Last thing we're going to cover is rule-based filtering. All right, so for example, suppose let's go back and do the individual invoice amount. So we'll right click on any one of these months, right? So right click there and we can do ungroup. Boom. And now we see all these individual dates blown up, right? So we're not anymore grouping them by month. We're just seeing all the individual dates because we totally ungrouped everything. Now, if you want, let's look at the different amounts, right? So suppose you only want to see the invoices that are at least $500. Let's see, I think I need to reload that page. Yeah. Okay. So if you want to do that, okay, drag and click the invoice field into the rows block. So and down. Whoop. Do that. Right. Well, I don't even know why we're doing that. Oh, right. So we had different invoices from the same day. Yeah. Okay, so if we want to track each, right, because before that, before we had invoices there, we just had the total for each day. But now we have to have the individual invoices, so we drag that down in there. Okay, now to only display the invoice above $500, right click on one of these invoices, right, the invoice number, not a date. Make sure it's an invoice number. Right click and then go to filter, and here we have value filters. So based on the value of the item, this is what we're going to do. And we can say show items for which in this case, sum of amount, because there's just one thing there. So the sum is the amount. Sum is greater than or equal to, right? Greater than or equal to 500. Ta-da. And then we only have these big ones, right? So the sum of amount, I can replace that. Let's go back and display that as the, well, we're just going to display that the old way. So value field settings, show values as just no calculation. Okay. So for all of these, it only lists the ones that are at least $500, and we can, quickly scan through and verify that that's the case. Okay, cool. There we go. Sorry, I bumped my headset. Okay. So what we learned, some simple stuff. We learned how to do different types of operations on our data. Like instead of just sums, we learned average and saw that there are some other possibilities. We learned sorting, how to sort a column, for example, in this case, vendors alphabetically. We learned how to group and ungroup data, right? We had data that was for individual dates. We grouped it into months. We had months. We ungrouped it back to individual dates. And we did some ranking, right? So, right, obviously you could sort things based on values, but if you just want to show the top or the bottom of a list, you can get that. And percentages, right? If you want to display your data not just as raw numbers, but as percentages of a total, you can do that. And last, rule-based filtering. So if you only want to show some subset of a data, one way to do that is with rule-based filtering. Like in our case, we showed only those invoices with an amount of at least $500. All right, so that's been your intro to pivot tables. I hope you found it useful and interesting. And that's all I got for this week. Thank you for your attention.